What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 281. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line, just like every week, is Luis Scott-Vargas. LSV, what's up, buddy?
Not much. We had the Battle of the Resources last week, and Eric Froelich beat me in the Vintage Super League, making me the lesser resource.
You know, it was a tough spot for me because, like, I felt awesome because no matter what, I was getting one of you guys in the finals, and that you know felt like a pretty sure bet. I liked that a lot. But then having to see you two battle it out, it was just like, no, I can't pick one. And yeah, ultimately Eric emerged victorious. But you'll be back for standard. Of course we're talking about the Vintage Super League for those that haven't caught up on it. And Luis and Ifro found themselves fighting each other in the last playoff to get to the finals against Chris Pakula, and ultimately Eric won. But you're going to be on Standard Super League coming up pretty soon as a commentator, right?
I am. The first episode actually starts this Tuesday, and I'll be doing commentary along with Randy Bueller on a pretty outstanding cast of characters. The same is true of the Vintage Super League. I think that the makeup of these leagues is just awesome. It's just
unbelievable.
Just all people you want to watch.
Yeah.
It's just so. Also, in the group Skype chat for the Standard Super League, so far, Randy said, hey, all right, everyone, this is the group Skype chat. This is how we're going to be managing the league. And then I said, Paul. And that's so far been the extent of the communications.
That's it.
Since,
well played. So we've got a show for you this week where we're going to be talking about the format Dragons of Tarkir Limited as it stands. And we're actually going to be going pretty deep here on the color pairs. This is a 2-color format, and we wanted to take a show to really kind of delve into what we've been discovering about the 2-color pairs and how things have kind of settled. Before we do, though, I want to mention our sponsor, ChannelFireball.com. They bring you the show each and every week. We're very proud to have them as our sponsor. And one of the big things that we've been talking about on the show quite a bit, Luis, is Grand Prix Vegas. It's you can find out information at grandprixvegas.com, and it is officially the biggest Magic tournament ever and going up. We've still got, about a month until the tournament actually starts, and it's already crossed that threshold. So things are really starting to heat up for Grand Prix Vegas. One thing I wanted to mention, Luis, was I was looking at the website, and I saw that there's a vendors and artists tab on the site. So I was like, well, what's this thing about? And I saw this really long list of names, and I'm like, what is going on here? And it's the announced artists list, and it is huge. I'm looking at it, and it's like, it's just everybody. Like anybody that is still active and can show their work seems to be showing up. I know a couple of my favorites are going to be there. Chris Ron. I really like Chris's work. He kind of jumps off the page for me here, but I mean, the list is absurd on who's going to be there.
Yeah, right now we've got 32 artists, and like you said, if they're a current Magic artist and they could make it out to Vegas, it seems like they've had there's just so many artists there, and if your favorite card's not on the list, then you probably don't have a very long list of favorite cards. Yeah,
I did notice that Una Fricker, she's not going to be there. I was pretty disappointed. I'm still holding out that she'll make it. But
does she draw like Gorilla Titan or something?
No, she drew the Man-O-War, the one with like the shark and the Man-O-War kind of dragging it away. She also drew Wasteland and a bunch of other cool cards, but I don't think she's active with Magic artwork anymore, so probably not going to see her at Vegas. But everybody else is going to be there, and I think that when we say there's 32 artists announced already, that should give you a feel for the kind of festival style that this thing's going to be. It's a 4-day event in a great city. And it's not just about showing up to play in the Grand Prix. That's kind of the capper. That's the big highlight of the thing. But there is a lot to do for anybody who's into Magic. Cannot recommend it enough. I've already booked everything. I can't wait to get down there myself.
Yeah, I'm super excited about it. I'm going to take a couple days off work. Normally I go into Grand Prix like Friday night late, but here I'm actually going to be leaving on Wednesday because, events start on Thursday. I'm going to be playing in like a bounty event on Thursday and Friday. So you can beat me and other Channel Fireball team members to get, free booster packs. And besides that, there's also the Vendilion Click playmat, which I just got to announce for every side event. And the best part, of course, is once someone shows you that one of the Vendilion Click members is holding a selfie stick and taking a picture of all three, then you can't unsee that, nor would you want to.
No, I've heard that immediately. But the art's really cool too.
No, it's awesome.
Those playmats are going to be insane. One other thing about CFB, limited resources t-shirts. They are available on there. We mentioned it last week. They are going fast. They have sold quite briskly. I'm not surprised. You guys told me that you wanted them for quite a long time. So now that they're finally here, they're moving. But make sure you grab yours. I'm not sure when we're going to be able to restock them. I'm not really sure how that process is going to work, but, they're there now. They're $11.99 for the shirts, and people, I've been getting some pictures of people on Twitter wearing them, and that always makes me happy. It's a neat thing where, when you see somebody using, the sleeves or the shirts or whatever, it's a really cool feeling, for me, just because when I see that, I'm like, that person, they identify with what we talk about on the show and how we approach magic and life and our personalities and that kind of thing. And they want to project that out to the world. And I think that that's a really awesome thing. And the shirt's a fun way to do that as well.
The first time I saw someone wearing a ChannelFireball shirt in the wild, as it were, it was a pretty awesome moment because, you're just like doing your normal day-to-day stuff and you're like, wow, someone likes the thing that I'm doing.
Yeah. How cool is that, right? Patreon. You can support the show directly through Patreon as well. Patreon.com/limited resources. We'll begin answering the Patreon question of the week here in a little bit. And in a couple more weeks, we'll have another giveaway. I've got another LR gift pack all packed up and ready to go for whoever happens to win that. So we'll talk about that. Before we get to that question, though, I did want to mention one other little kind of housekeeping thing here. The cube, the limited resources cube on Magic Online, it's still going. You can follow at LR Cube on Twitter to find out any information. The main steward of that cube is David Stewart. He's from Toronto. I'm going to be seeing him up at the GP. And
he's the main steward of the cube.
He is, yeah. And he's going to be running some cube events up there. On Magic Online. You can find out about it. They're free. You get to jump in. It's a good way to kind of test out Magic Online or test out Cube so you can get a feel for it. And it's something that can also help sharpen your limited skills. So again, LR Cube on Twitter is where you can get information for that. Our question from the Patreon is from Adam Staborski. He actually works on coverage as well. And he had a good question. I also want to mention really quickly that the questions have been fantastic on there. It is every time I go to choose the question, I'm like, I could pick 6 or 7 of these easily, like no questions asked and just boom, put it on the show and it would be great. I really appreciate you guys putting those questions in. I'll be putting up the post for the next one and, just keep hammering away. We'll work through them. He says, if I'm introducing or sharing limited with a newer and less experienced player, is there a format that works well for explaining the basic concepts of draft? What do you make of that, Luis? Is there a format, or like, are you the type of person that thinks, well, you should maybe just make up, kind of rig a format so that they get a feel for it in a more digestible way?
Well, certainly don't start by doing cube draft. You were just talking about cube, and cube is not the place to jump in because that's closer to constructed than it is draft in a lot of ways. I think that I would lean towards just, using whatever the most recent core set is. I mean, I'm assuming you're dealing with a person who knows how to play Magic and maybe has played sealed and whatnot before. Because if your first introduction to limited should be sealed, it should not be draft.
Agree.
So if you're trying to level up someone from sealed to draft, you know what? And honestly, it doesn't even have to be a core set. It can just be whatever cards that player has been playing with the most in sealed. So if you have one of your friends who just started playing Magic, just started getting into limited Magic, has done, 3 or 4 sealeds with, say, triple cons or all cons of Tarkir when cons was the format, I would probably have them draft cons, even though it's not necessarily going to go super smoothly. You got to start somewhere, and at least knowing all the cards to begin with, or knowing a good amount of them, I think will remove some amount of stress.
I agree. I think it's about expectations management. I just recently taught my friend Adam to play, and I did what you recommended, Luis, that we had him play a few sealed decks to kind of get an idea for what a limited deck looks like. Getting those things of like, well, you're going to play 17 or 18 lands, these things that are just not intuitive. You just sort of have to be told them. And then, he got an account on Magic Online and did the new player drafts, which were, of the format that he had built, roughly, I think it was like Fate Reforged and, cons on there. And so he went through and I told him beforehand, just don't set your expectations too high. Drafting's difficult. It's tricky. There's a lot of different moving parts here, but you'll get a feel for it and you'll understand, oh, okay, I'm in these colors and now I don't have to look at the whole pack. I can just look at the cards of these colors and you'll get a feel for it. And he's really come around nicely on it too. So I think that it's just a matter of, you want to give this gift, right? Like, of showing somebody what draft is and how it works. It's such a great activity. It's just one of those, really fantastic things. And, but you just got to make sure that you set the expectations where they should be at the beginning, and people will pick it up pretty quickly. We've got an important sub question from the Reddit as well, or excuse me, from the Patreon as well, from Aaron Brotman. And he says, Marshall, do you fear, as I do, that the new booster packaging spoiled today will affect the smell of a newly opened pack? Aaron, I absolutely do fear that. I would be sad if the new pack smell went away, but I also have to say it's totally worth it. The new packaging, for those that haven't seen it yet, is recyclable now. So all of those foil wrappers that you open at a sealed event, and if you've ever been to a Grand Prix and seen how much, waste is generated from just opening up the packs and stuff, it's much, much, much better overall to have the packs, and maybe it'll even still smell the same. I don't know. So I had to address that pressing issue. All right. Speaking of new pack smell, let's get a little of this. Oh yeah. It still smells good. Okay. We're deeper on this format now, Luis. We've been around the block here, and this is where the crack of packs start picking up in pace a little bit, where we can kind of, get an idea of where we want to go. First card is Center Soul. No,
it's just not the kind of card you want to first pick, and it doesn't even make it into every deck.
Right. Exactly. Carsey Sadist. I'm also just nope on that one.
Totally agree.
Now this one's decent. Sabretooth Outrider has been making the cut for me pretty consistently. Well, it always makes the cut. I shouldn't say that. I've been happy with it pretty consistently. And when I first saw it, I wasn't sure that was going to be the case. But yeah, I like that. Sabretooth Outrider's been good.
Yeah, Outrider is quite good. Yeah. It's the best red creature at common for sure, and edges towards the best red commons regardless of which order you put the removal spells in.
Yeah, it does work. The fact that it takes up half of Formidable on its own is nice, because once you get Formidable going, it's very difficult to interact with in combat. Champion of Erishin is next. That's the 3/2 lifelink for 4 mana, 3 and a white.
More of a filler card than like something like the Sabretooth. So again, not a card I can really ever imagine first picking.
Yeah. This one too, Glade Watcher. That's the one in a green 3/3 defender. If you've got Formidable, you can pay a green and let it freed from its shackles to attack for a turn. Card's been okay. I wouldn't, again, it's nowhere near first pick quality, but it's done some work for me.
Yeah. I would say it's a little bit above filler because I'm actually happy to have this in my deck when I have a good amount of creatures to go with it. But it's not a card, again, I want to take super early.
Right.
But it does get better multiples. Having a couple of these means that you're going to be formidable.
Yeah, and I've seen that happen. Also, it's nice just because it does block pretty well, too. Gurmag Drowner is next.
I do like Gurmag Drowner, and I think this is one of the cards besides Sabretooth you could make an argument for taking, though. Again, you would never be super happy if you're taking one of these cards first. I've said this before. You're never super happy for taking a common first pick.
Right.
It just, formats don't work that way anymore. So,
no. This next one is Misthoof Kirin. I put it right in that same category with these other two. I like it. The card's been really good for me. It's a solid pickup, but it kind of fits that description that you just said, where if I'm first picking it, I'm like, well, I'm not that thrilled about that.
I would say it's a step behind Drowner and Sabretooth.
Oh, do you think so?
I do. Part of it is I actually really don't like white, having drafted more, and we'll talk about this a little later, but I have white in last place in terms of the colors that I want to be drafting.
Oh, interesting. Oh, I'm excited to hit on that, because I have it in the middle, like middle high. Anyway, we'll talk about it. Ojutai Summons.
I like Ojutai Summons. I think it's the best blue common, and I'm happy to pick it up. It's good card advantage, and it's good. It actually does a good amount for your board presence. So far, this is the card I'm on picking.
Yeah, I really like Ojutai Summons too. Remember, I mentioned I went down and did a draft at Wizards early in the format, and some of the people from R&D really liked Ojutai Summons, and so I've always had my eye on it, and it really hasn't gone down for me. I don't think it's like a bomb quality card or anything like that, but I think it's really good too. Evolving Wilds, yeah, not first picking it.
No,
Okay,
I don't hate fifth picking or fourth picking Evolving Wilds out of weak packs just to pick up the idea of the splash.
What about Twin Bolt? We got a real card here.
Twin Bolt, I think, is the pick right now. It's the best red common, and I think red is better than blue. And it's just efficient. It's a 2-mana card. When you have a 2-mana card and a 5-mana card that are roughly identical in terms of power level, or very close in terms of power level, just pick the 2-mana card. You can never end up with too many 2-mana cards. You can easily end up with too many 5-mana cards. Trust me.
Yeah. 5 is where you start, buddy. All right. Yeah, I agree. I like Twin Bolt so far out of the pack. But now we're at the uncommon. So let's see what we got. First one up is Ruthless Deathfang. That's the 6-mana 4/4 flyer. For 4 blue black, and whenever you sack a creature, target opponent has to sack a creature too. So it's, kind of the built-in synergy with exploit is what they were going for here.
Ruthless Deathfang is very good. I would put it at slightly above Twin Bolt if casting cost wasn't an issue. Mm-hmm. But
you mean like colors?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would much rather not take. Well, both actually. 6 mana is a thing. But yeah, mainly it's the fact that it's 2 colors. I just don't want to take a 2-color card over a 1-color card when the power level is close.
Yeah, I like Twin Bolt over the Deathfang as well. Even though I like Deathfang better as a card, I just don't think it's...
Yeah, let's say, assuming I had 2 blue cards, I would just take the Deathfang over Twin Bolt. But given pick one, pack one, I would take the Twin Bolt so far.
Right, exactly. Next, it's my old buddy, Youthful Scholar.
I like Youthful Scholar. I was surprised at the Pantheon rating Youthful Scholar pretty low.
I was too. I'm a huge fan of that card.
I think the card's pretty awesome. I do think that you're still probably better off taking Twin Bolt first pick, first pack, but I wouldn't fault anyone for taking Youthful Scholar, and I'd have to think about which one I'd want.
Right. My gut says to go with Youthful Scholar because I think it's sweeter, but I think Twin Bolt's probably just a better card. It's close though for me. I think Youthful Scholar is really good. Self-inflicted wound is next. This is the 1 in a black sorceries. Target opponent sacks a green or white creature and loses 2 life. I'm not really considering this on the first pick scale here.
No, and even among the cycle of sideboard cards, this is on the slightly lower end just because it's a sacrifice effect. Your opponent has choice, and it just makes it too weak against, say, something like Sandstep Outcast that just makes a token.
Yeah, totally. All right, our rare is Kolaghan's Command. Now... this is real life Kolaghan's Command.
Yes. Last week on Magic Online, it was dealing an extra 2 damage
for free.
Reasons unbeknownst, and it got cast against me lots. But
yes, it did. Now they fixed it, and so it's the same on Magic Online as it is now. And just a quick reminder, it's 1 black-red, so 3 mana instant. You get to choose 2 of the following. You can return creature card from your graveyard to your hand. You can make somebody discard a card. You can destroy an artifact, or you can have do 2 damage to a creature or player. A solid versatile card. But, for me, it's funny, when I put it up against even a card like Twin Bolt, I always just end up taking the Twin Bolt, because, the main reason I want Kolaghan's Command is for that 2 damage to a creature or player. And Twin Bolt does that, but leaves me in just 1 color and actually does it for cheaper too. Not that the rest of the text on Kolaghan's Command isn't important. It is. But the color commitment thing is pretty raw. Now, that being said, I've been playing, black-red a fair bit and have been quite happy with it as well. I think it's one of the better 2-color combos. We'll get to that right after the Crack-a-Pack here. But, I would take Twin Bolt out of this pack.
I would too. If I were already black-red, I would take Kolaghan's Command. Mm-hmm. I think a better card if you don't look at the black mana symbol and the casting cost.
Yeah.
And even if it was 2 in a red for Kolaghan's Command versus 1 in a red for Twin Bolt, I would still take the command. Mm-hmm. But given that, again, it's first pick, first pack, this is a 2-color format. You don't want to be locked into 2 from the get-go. I would just take the 1-color card. So I like it. A common beat a rare.
Yeah, I like that. That doesn't happen every time in this format. That's for sure. Okay. So let's move on now. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to remember, the person who wins the giveaway for the Patreon thing also gets all of the rares from our Crack-a-Pack. So far that person is getting Zergo Bellstriker and Kolaghan's Command. So a little aggro deck.
Nice little, black-red deck in the building.
Yeah, not bad at all. All right. So let's dive into these color pairs. I know that, you were having some discussions with Owen Turtenwald and Eric Froelich about, some of the ones that they thought, and that kind of sparked a discussion between us when we decided, all right, let's get into these things. Let's just go through all of them and we'll kind of give our take on it. It's a tough thing. I think that, this is the type of thing that really benefits talking to your friends. You were talking to Owen and Efro, and, if you've got friends that draft, regularly, whose opinions you respect, I think this is really a great topic of discussion to really sort of pick their brains and get to it. Because the thing is, there's 10 two-color combos in the format, and I've been drafting the format quite a bit. But even then, I was just writing up some quick notes about each of the two-color pairs, and I was like, I haven't really drafted that one that much. Maybe one just slipped through the cracks, or maybe my natural tendencies led me away from it, or maybe I just don't like it. And, that means that the data sample I'm working from, in some cases, it could just be like, I've played it once, twice. I've played this particular two-color combo just a couple of times, and that's really not enough to make a great conclusion from. But if you can talk to your friends and they're telling you, dude, I've been playing this color combo that you don't ever play, and it's been really good to me. Well, that can be a big game for you, because you can, branch out into something that maybe you weren't aware of before. Maybe you got stuck in a rut. So I think this will be kind of fun for us to throw the things that we've heard from the people that we know, and of course our own opinions into it. Any big picture stuff that you want to hit before we dive into the pairs?
I think that the most interesting thing about this format so far is how much people disagree about what's good in the format. So we've got this kind of like strange dichotomy going where on the one hand, everyone is like, yeah, this is a pretty, straightforward format. All the cards kind of do what they say they're going to do. There's nothing super complicated going on. And then you look at, 3 different, Pro Tour testing teams, the people who have the most incentive to break the format, come out with 3 pretty drastically different pick order lists and opinions on what's good. And then you look at multiple articles that people write that are like saying other things too. And it's like, wow, people really disagree on this despite saying it's a simple format, which leads me to think that it's not quite as simple or not quite as obvious as it looks, or people are valuing just different things but that usually doesn't line up that way. Usually when you have a bunch of people talking, they end up somewhat close to each other because, the cards do what they say they do. The cards, they don't have hidden text. And right. How can these people disagree so much?
Yeah, that is interesting. I generally, view that as something that would be good. Like, I think that that's cool. I love formats where people disagree a lot and there's not as much certainty. I think that it gets really interesting because the people that really do figure it out end up having an edge, especially when, cause I think that there's this first level, right, where you're like, well, I don't really know. And you're obviously at a disadvantage to somebody who does. But the people that are at a real disadvantage are the ones that think they know, but they're wrong, right? You're pushing hard in the wrong direction. Those are the ones that really can get messed up. So I think keeping an open mind during these things is really important as well. So why don't we go through some of these color pairs, Luis, and we'll give our thoughts on it. And, I encourage you at home, the listener, one of the sort of core tenets to this show and the way that we approach these type of things is we want you to take the tools and the ideas that we give you and then apply them to your own experience and your own knowledge base and then come up with your own conclusions, right? Like Luis and I have our own personal tendencies and we try to, sort of set those aside when we're talking about the show in a more general sense. But, you have your own too, and your experience counts. And so I think that, the best way to approach information like this is to take it as more data points, right? Like Luis and I will give you what we've discovered. And those are 2 probably fairly strong data points. Luis and I think about Magic, basically for a living, and we both draft a lot, probably more than most people. And, so we've got some good stance, but you also have your own experience and that's important too. Don't forget that. So let's start off with blue-black, Luis. That's the deck I think that's been talked about the most for the format. It was, we talked about it early on. It was kind of the obvious deck, right? It was the one that the cards seemed to line up the easiest. The main mechanic for this 2-color pair, remember half of these color pairs will have sort of their own mechanic built in, which is of course exploit for this blue-black deck, really seemed to line up nicely with the cards that were available. Some of the cards that came to mind early, was a Gurmag Drowner that we have here, from our Crack-A-Pack. Also the Vulturous Aven. Those 2 cards, are somewhat similar. And then of course the synergy with Jeskai Sage, Palace Familiar, and, the Emissary, right? The Sultai Emissary. These things sort of, and then even going a little deeper, Youthful Scholar, if you can get your hands on one of those or whatever. And so this sort of formed this core, I think, for this control deck. because there's other good removal running around in a deck like this, cards like Flatten and even Defeat, or, some of the more narrow cards, or even a card like Deathwind or whatever, sort of gave it a good shell, and you could kind of figure out how you wanted to win later, but usually it was through card advantage. How strong do you feel about this blue-black deck at this point in the format?
So I think the reason that blue-black got a lot of press is because it's one of the most obvious decks, both because Exploit says what you should be doing, and because it's one of the decks where the card valuations change the most. So it's the deck with the most synergy. It's just, it's got,
right.
You want to draft your Exploit cards and your Palace Familiars and your Youthful Scholars and whatnot, and you want to combine it all. And the deck's very powerful. When the deck comes together, it looks like it's doing broken stuff. It's just ends up with 6 cards in its hand when its opponent's on 2 cards, and it's killed all its opponent's creatures.
Right.
And as a result, I actually do think the deck was overrated.
Mm-hmm.
I think the deck is very good. I think it's easily in my top couple color combinations, but you can still be rated highly and be overrated. I mean, you could still be legitimately good and be overrated, and I think that's what's going on with blue-black, is that I think people in general, I mean, our team too, was a little higher on blue-black than it needed to be, just because when it doesn't come together, sometimes the deck can be pretty bad. Right. And it does need specific cards and a kind of different subsets of each card. So it needs the exploit creatures and the creatures to sacrifice to them. And if it doesn't get those things, then you kind of end up with, cards that don't do as much. I mean, that's the risk of a synergy deck, is you end up with some cards that aren't quite as powerful as they need to be.
Right. Yeah. I mean, for me, this is still my favorite deck to get in the format, but I rarely go after it anymore, just because I do feel like it's slightly overdrafted. Maybe not quite as much as early on, but where, like you said, the pieces just sort of line up, and you really are fighting over a lot of the same stuff. And it's pretty tough to support 2 drafters in one 2-color pair in this format. So, I'll take it if it's there. Don't get me wrong, but I find myself drafting more aggressive, assertive decks these days, just because I feel like I can branch out from there a little bit further.
Draft is a self-balancing mechanism. So right. If people get off blue-black, then the deck becomes absurd again. And like I said, its base level is higher than a lot of the other decks in the format. But yeah, right now I'm not quite as locked in on it as I used to be.
Right. Speaking of more aggressive decks, one of the decks that I've been drafting with, and, I gotta say, before I talk about the black-red deck, that this format's been rough. Man, I have not, I wouldn't say I hate it, but I haven't been enjoying it that much. And I have 2 theories on it. The first is that I've been losing. And
that never helps.
And that can always, sort of taint your opinion. It's sort of a cliche, but you'll often see people say best format ever. I'm, crushing, or this format sucks. It's all about the rares when they're losing. Right. And I try not to fall for that trap. But it probably does, affect me a little bit, when I'm losing more than I'm winning. But also I've had just a tough time finding my lane. My draft strategy, for anybody that's watched my videos will know that I prefer to try to stay open, right? I really will speculate a lot in the first pack and try to kind of get settled in. And I really want to know what is this seat telling me to draft? And that's really what I push for. And I'm pretty good at that these days. I've got that down, and I cannot figure it out in this format. Every time I'm like, it feels like everything's changing all the time, and I just don't have a good sense for where my opponents are at. And then the other weird thing, and this could just be my imagination, because, for example, the pack that we opened for our Crack-A-Pack had tons of good cards in it. I mean, totally playable cards in this pack. We had the Outrider, the Drowner, the Ojutai Summons, Twin Bolt, Scholar. The Rare was decent. The Ruthless Deathfang. I mean, there's a lot of, perfectly playable fine cards in that pack. I just feel like a lot of times that's not the case. I look at a pack and I'm just like, well, I guess I'll take this thing, but I'm not really passing anything anyway, right? I find myself saying that to myself way more often than I normally do, where it's just like, well, there's nothing in this pack anyway. There's nothing in this pack anyway. And I'm just wondering, either there's nothing in the pack, or I'm just missing, I'm missing a niche that I should be going down or something. But anyway, that was my little soapbox about the format. It's probably just because I'm losing. Black-red.
So one of the reasons that I think Black-red's the best deck, even though, and again, let me put this caveat out there. When I say that this color combination is the best deck, or I don't like this other color combination. All 10 are draftable. Even if there's a scale, it doesn't mean that black-red is, twice as good as the next one, or even twice as good as the ones on the bottom of the scale. I think that maybe black-red's twice as good as like the worst color combination, but in general, I think the color combinations are fairly even, or at least within a tight enough range that you shouldn't take like a bad red card over a good green card because you want to be a specific combination. I don't think it's quite that extreme. There are no color combinations that I just won't draft, for example.
That's good to note. Yeah.
But I do like black-red. I think there's a couple reasons for that. One is it's just got a great removal. Black-red always has this. The other is that it has Goblin Heel Cutter in Fate Reforged.
The card is so good.
Talking to Owen, he's currently the number 2 ranked player in the world. He thinks Goblin Heel Cutter is the best common across both sets. And, I can't disagree. I played the Magic Online Championships last week and actually streamed it to give people some sealed strategy or not strategy, as it were. And, I had 2 heel cutters in a pretty bad black-red deck, and every time I drew heel cutter, it was just awesome. And
it was unbelievable.
And if you ever drew 2, that was just game. Your opponent's like, all right, I know you have a heel cutter, so I'll leave these 2 creatures back. You have a 2/2 out. All right, 2 heel cutters, I take 8. All right, I guess I'm dead.
Right, okay, I guess that was it. I've had the same experience with heel cutter. The card, I've had mediocre red X decks going into the last pack and picked up 2 heel cutters and just felt unstoppable. Every time I drew one, it felt like the best card I could possibly draw. I think part of the reason for that is this black-red deck is really aggressive. Like it's more aggressive than any deck from the previous format, where heel cutter could be in. So that means that, heel cutter wants to be in an aggressive deck, and now it really has its home here. The deck, it can be a dash centric deck. Remember, this is black-red, so this is the dash colors. I had a question when I first was looking at the set on, is there going to be a dash deck? Specifically, Warbringers, Ambuscade Shamans, a dash deck. And it turns out that, that does exist, kind of, but it just doesn't have to be. Like, most of the decks that I draft that are black-red have dash creatures in them, but I wouldn't say, well, I've built a dash deck here. Like that, I'm going to be, abusing this mechanic. It's more just like you use it as a flexibility tool or a way to get in extra damage or something like that. But this deck does have all the tools, right? You can kill small things with this deck, Twin Bolt, Defeat, that kind of card. You can kill bombs. You can, Reach of Shadows, Ultimate Price, Deathwind away. You talked about Goblin Heel Cutter, which, can nullify, most of the best blockers in the format. And you've also got these sort of big finishers, with, like a Tarka Efreet is one that I've had good success with. We talked about Sabertooth Outrider earlier, and Sprinting Warbrute. My God, that card hits so hard. Like when they just dash it on turn 4 and you're just like, well, I'm taking 5, I guess. And it's like, wow, that's a lot of damage. And normally I don't even mind it when my opponent dashes early in the game because I feel like, well, I'm going to be able to get my board state caught up and I'll be ahead. And it's like the Warbrute just gets you down into range so quickly that now all of a sudden, I don't know how often this has happened to you, Luis, but I find myself playing against this deck and just always fearing Sarkhan's Rage. I'm just like, it's just like, I feel like I can't even go down to 5, or less because I'm just going to get Sarkhan's Raged out. But a lot of times these dash creatures kind of dictate that you are going to go down to 5 or below.
Yeah, part of the reason that deck is so good is that it has incredible reach. It has, besides Sarkhan Rage, it also has Temur Battle Rage. I found to be quite so good. Yeah. Just because you have like a Tarka Efreet at 6/2, you have Goreswine at 4/1, you have the Sprinting Warbrute. Sabertooth Outrider doesn't need it quite as much as the others, but still another 4-power creature. So you end up having ways to deal just massive amounts of damage out of nowhere between Dash, Temur Battle Rage, Sarkhan's Rage, and other rage-based cards. So you end up with a deck that kind of makes your opponent feel like they're going to be dead if they do anything, which gives you more time to draw these things. Add to that black-red can play as a control deck if you just get enough removal. So,
yes.
And play things like Gurmag Angler after playing a couple burn spells. Like that still works out pretty well.
It does. And the Warbrute too, right? Like if you just kill all their threats and the last thing standing is a Warbrute, you don't need much to back it up to win the game.
Yeah. And I think just the fact that black-red just has good card quality across the board. It's just the 2 best colors in Dragons and among the best colors, in Fate Reforged, and has just synergy and power. there's not a whole lot not to like here. And the dash deck is only a very small part of it. It's just all the cards stand on their own. It's like the good parts about a synergy deck with still just all the power level stuff that you would want.
Yeah. I have it really high on my list too. I think relative to the way that people draft now, it's probably the best deck. It's the one I've had the most success with. When I get into this deck, I feel like, okay, now I know what I'm doing and I'm happy to be there. Next one is blue-red, which is completely the opposite for me. I can't even remember drafting it. Maybe I did, but this is not one I have a strong feeling about. My impressions of it, thinking about it, like it doesn't really seem to have a cohesive plan. It feels like a tempo type deck. You got the cheap aggressive threats and the flyers, and then I'm assuming you would use, the burn spells that we get. We talked about, a minute ago. Your Draconic Roars and your Twin Bolts and such, in conjunction with, Ojutai's Breath, Will of the Naga type cards, maybe even like a Sidisi's Faithful or some type of, bouncy, tempo-y stuff to just push through damage. But honestly, like I said, I don't know if I've drafted it, and I don't even remember playing against it, really. Do you have a strong opinion on this archetype?
Blue-red is an archetype I really enjoyed drafting in the previous format when it was Paper Forged and Cons. That was the Temur Battle Rage, Whirlwind Adept deck. I just loved Whirlwind Adept so much. But I like it a lot less in this format. It feels like it doesn't really have a cohesive plan, like you said, because the blue cards in Dragons, I think, are just too controlling. The aggressive blue cards in Dragons aren't good enough. Mm-hmm. I just don't think that they pull their weight. And the red cards are just so heavily slanted towards aggression that you either end up with a aggressive red deck that's maybe splashing a couple blue cards, but I wouldn't really call that a blue-red deck quite as much. Mm-hmm. Or you end up with a blue-red deck that has like cheap red creatures, then Ojutai's Summons and Gurmag Drowner, and it's like, well, this isn't really a combo.
Yeah, you're not exactly going off. No, that's a great point. A couple of cards that come to mind when you were saying that the blue aggressive cards don't really pull their weight, I think of Ojutai Interceptor, which is one of the better versions, and that card's actually kind of slow for a deck like this. Once you get it flipped up and attacking for 4, fair enough, but that takes a good sink of mana to actually get going, and it's quite fragile. And the other one that comes to mind is Elusive Spellfist. And you know what? Considering that he has the word fist in his name, doesn't pack that much of a punch. Really doesn't. Like, even when you're, kind of making it work, you're still only hitting for 2, usually. It's just not that big of a thing. I've seen Elusive Spellfist be decent against a controlling deck where you can use it to power through the last few damage that you need to or something. But, if you're trying to do like a curve out style deck, you play an Elusive Spellfist on 2, you play a face down Ojutai Interceptor and flip it up on 4, like, you're not really going off there. Like, you can be raced quite easily by a faster deck like the black-red deck that we said. And, your setup is quite fragile and pretty mana intensive. The cards just don't really stand on their own enough. So I'm not surprised that neither of us are super stoked on this one.
Yeah, I'm also pretty low on Ojutai Interceptor. The card has just not impressed me. You spend too much mana for too little return.
Yeah, see, the thing is, like, when I first saw it, I thought it was super solid, because I thought it would just do a lot of work. I've just found that it dies more often than I'm comfortable with. Like Twin Bolt, getting that thing Twin Bolted is complete misery. And it dies to some of the cheaper stuff too, like even, a Deathwind or something for cheap kills it. It's definitely gone down for me, even though, its stats, still look decent.
Well, clearly you're always going to play it. If you're playing a blue deck and you have Ojutai's Interceptor in your pool, you're going to play it. You're also going to still take it relatively high just because it is, it's a solid card. I'm just saying, I don't think it's that close to like Ojutai's Summons or even Gurmag Drowner. I generally like the Drowner a lot more.
Okay. Yeah. And again, that points us to doesn't really go great in this type of deck. Next is a deck I actually like a lot. It's red-green. So this is, of course, Formidable, is the keyword for this color pair. And Formidable does come up, but it is funny. I think that we kind of predicted this in the early stages, but, getting to Formidable is a nice goal. Not so much because you get to activate Formidable, but just because you have a huge board state that gets to attack. And I've found that, the red removal spells do a great job of, keeping key blockers out of the way. and your green combat tricks go a long way, and the red ones too. We mentioned Temur Battle Rage in the black-red deck. Well, this is the deck where it thrives, right? Temur Battle Rage is fantastic in red-green, and because you've got these huge green creatures that love it, and the red creatures love it in this set too. We mentioned, Tarka Sprinting Warbrute, that kind of card. You bring the hammer down with Temur Battle Rage. It gets ugly. Also, the combat tricks. You've got Tread Upon, which I've been really impressed by. Epic Confrontation, which is just really, really good, right? I mean, that's just, one of the best green cards in the whole set, if not the best at common. I've just found that the cards work really well together. Even Tread Upon has done serious work for me. I've just found that you've got your Sprinting Warbrutes, Atarka Beastbreaker is a nice one to clean up, later in the game. And it's pretty tough to combo that with Tread Upon, but, I've just found that people, try to trade off a lot and that prevents it and gets in huge chunks of damage similar to what a Temur Battle Rage does.
Red green is the deck, I like the most after red black and blue black. I just think, like you said, the cards work well together. The cards are all powerful. This is a lot of the same stuff we were saying about red black. Mm-hmm. It's just like the 1-2, punch, as it were, of just cards that are good by themselves and cards that are better together. And that's really what you're looking for. This is, like we've been saying, a limited format that not a ton of super complicated stuff is going on. So having this recipe that's fairly simple of, quality alone and then even higher quality together, it is really good. And you don't have problems like blue-red where it has, a lower card quality, especially when you're looking at which cards are going to be included in your deck, and anti-synergy. So that's kind of like the opposite of what you want.
Right. And I think that this is a fairly, stereotypical type color pair here for you could look at a lot of I could see this type of deck existing in a core set pretty easily. And that leads you away from the whole formidable thing. Again, it's not really about taking cards that say formidable on them. It's just about taking big creatures, good removal, solid combat tricks, and just drafting a good curve and just beating people down. This is the Summit Prowler deck, right? It sort of embodies everything Summit Prowler stands for. Green blue. So this color pair typically, so the normal baseline for this color pair, if it's going to be good, is you play big green creatures and you back them up with blue spells that, can keep your opponent's blockers off balance. Meaning, you tap them, you bounce them, you freeze them, whatever it is, you get them out of the way temporarily, and that clears the way for these huge green creatures. And then you also get the access to some sweet flyers, maybe even some card draw, some extra stuff like that. What you don't get, generally speaking, is removal, right? Green and blue are the two weakest colors when it comes to outright removal. They just don't generally get to take a creature and just get rid of it. They can temporarily move it out of the way, or recently these fight cards like Epic Confrontation have, come to the forefront for green. And so you do get those type of effects, which are really great. Green used to not really have that type of thing until we saw, I think Prey Upon was the first one that jumped out for me, but now you do get one of these pretty often, and that's a huge bonus for this type of deck. That being said, I haven't found this color pair to be particularly strong at doing that. I have had a couple of decks that I've had. I've actually won 2 different 8/4s with green blue decks, but you know what they both had in them? Sarkhan. And, he's great. And I'm talking about the GG one, the 5/4. And the bombs that you get obviously influence it. And this deck is capable of jumping up into darn good territory with a few bombs, but I think that's probably true of every deck. And your typical look at green blue, look, this is probably my favorite 2-color combo in Magic, and I don't really like to draft it that much in this format.
Yeah, I don't either. I liked it a lot more in cons, mostly because it had Ice Feather even.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons to draft green blue is that if you get 2 Ethereal Ambushes, that card is quite strong. I do like playing Ethereal Ambush.
Mm-hmm. And you can get them. If they're around, you're getting them.
Very few people are going to be taking them from you. Let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. But again, this is part of the problem I have with blue, is that blue doesn't play very nicely with others because blue and red actually both have somewhat of a similar problem here. And that's that they're both colors where their best cards don't always mesh well with what other colors are doing. In red's case, it's aggression, though that is generally going to be pretty good, and red is more powerful, so that makes it easier. But that's for blue, the problem is when you combine it with something like green or red. Blue's trying to play these controlling cards, and green and red just don't offer the correct backup. Green has expensive creatures; it doesn't need expensive ways to get card advantage.
Exactly.
Gurmag Drowner is just not that good in a green-blue deck. Neither is Archetype Summons. Summons is a good card, but they're not really what these decks are missing. And adding the odd Ojutai's Breath to the deck doesn't really help that much, because that's, again, not really where you want to go with all these cards. So
right.
I will draft green-blue. Again, all the color combinations are draftable, and Ethereal Ambush does do a good job of salvaging it. But yeah, I'm not in love with green-blue either.
Yeah, I wish I was. Like I said, the decks that I've had success with it were really fun. I had one that prompted my opponent to say that they had never seen somebody so faithful to Sidisi in their life.
Yeah.
I ran 3 Sidisi's faithfuls in that deck, just as, get stuff out of the way and crunch in with my, stampeding elk herd or whatever. But the problem is it just doesn't come together like that very often. Next color pair is green-black. And this one to me is, not a super synergistic deck, right? There's a few levels of synergy that you'll usually find in limited, and we're exploring those with this discussion here for sure. The first level for me, the top tier, is a deck that has sort of R&D built-in synergies, right? A keyword, something like that, where it's like, like the exploit deck, I think is a close one in this format. And in other formats, we've had even more, where it's kind of like the more copies of cards that you have in your deck that have this one word on them, the better it gets. When you see decks like that, you can get some super synergistic decks where you make picks that are not based on raw power level, but based on synergy and be correct. The next tier for me are cards that just work well together. I think the red-green deck in this format is the perfect example of that. We talked about the combat tricks working well with just the glut of just big, high-powered creatures that these two colors have in this set. And that's just sort of a natural magic synergy where it's like there's enough copies of these certain cards and these certain cards to make it so that you can get a good balance pretty consistently with the colors. Then there's sort of the next tier down, which is the last tier, I think, which is like you're sort of putting two colors together that aren't doing a lot to help each other out. Maybe you have some powerful cards in each of the colors, but they're just sort of sitting there in their little silos saying, well, I'm pretty good and I'm pretty good and I'm pretty good, but nothing's really helping you, advance a particular play style or type of deck. And I think green-black in this format's kind of like that. Like, if I go down the list, I like a lot of the green cards and I like a lot of the black cards that are available. But when you play the deck, it's like, I feel like I need to look at my list and just like get an aggregate of the overall power level of the cards. Like how good did I run in the draft by taking, the highest power level, options from these two colors. And that's going to give me a better indicator of how my deck does rather than, a synergy deck where I might want to look at it, based on, which tools I have and where things fit together. Green black, not a huge fan of it.
No, things are looking pretty grim for green-black, but by that I mean it's not a great color combination, and it needs grim contest.
Yeah, that is the payoff, though, right? If you draft a solid green-black deck, you can end up, grim contest and like Ukud Cobras and stuff, and you can kind of do some cool stuff.
If I knew I was going to get exactly 2 to 3 or at least 2 to 3 grim contests every time I drafted green-black, I still wouldn't think the deck was insane, but at least it'd be a lot better.
Yeah.
Problem is, even if you're the only person in green-black, which you probably are, it's not a very, often drafted color combination, you're still not like favored to get too many grim contests. There just aren't going to be that many opened in 8 packs.
Right.
So green-black, runs into the problem of the cards are fine, but they don't really work well together. I do like the combo of Typhoid Rats plus big green creatures, but
I do too.
in general, none of these cards are overperforming. And the archetypes which we like, the ones we're talking about as being better, those are the ones where they have good cards and those cards overperform when they're combined in the correct manner. So green-black is very in the middle of the pack because it's not got bad cards and the cards, are fine together. They're not anti-synergistic like say in blue-red, but they also aren't super synergistic. They're just kind of this is just a basic limited deck.
Exactly.
It's a deck of limited cards.
Yeah. And like I said, I think that if you want to know how good your deck is in that scenario, you look at how good the cards are that are in the deck. And, the best limited decks, you can't use that metric to decide because it's about synergy. It's about the deck, how well it works together, where if you take individual cards, they probably don't look that great. But when you look at it as a whole, everything clicks together. With these type of middle range kind of no synergy decks, it's really just about like how well did you draft, like how good are the cards you took. Black white is our next one. And this is, it has a warrior sub theme. It's not quite as strong, I don't think, as it was in the previous format, but there's some warrior stuff kind of hanging around here. But ultimately, I feel like this just ends up being a fairly solid color pair in two relatively deep colors. It's not like when I play this deck, and I have played it with and against it, fairly often. It typically tends to be more aggressive. You've got a few black dash creatures floating around. You've got the kind of solid white creatures that you tend to pick up in limited these days. Nothing overwhelming for the most part, but some decent stuff. And then black white has a nice removal suite. You can kill pretty much anything in black white. You've got your pacifisms and your ultimate prices, your flattens, and you've got, even your second tier of removal, which still gets the job done, your sandblast, your enduring victories, that kind of stuff. So, I think this is a solid color pair, but it kind of hasn't really blown me away either.
It's funny. I was wondering if Black White Warriors got overdrafted because it was so good in the previous format.
Oh, that totally could be.
Because people
and the words warriors pop up a lot on the new cards. It's just, if you really look, it's just not that rewarding.
Exactly. There's a comment that gives all warriors vigilance, but it's like, okay.
It's like shrug, yeah.
Well, and Fate Reforged was part of the last format. So there's this bridge, connecting the two formats. So of course Black White Warriors is still
totally.
Except it's not. Again, Black White is, I would put it above Green Black for sure because it's got a little bit better of synergy and the power level is, I think, pretty decent. But it's not doing anything super special. It is nice that it can pick up a couple harsh sustenance sometimes because
good point.
Other people won't necessarily want those. And harsh sustenance is a lot higher of a payoff than Grim Contest. Mm-hmm. Killing their creature and gaining 4 life is very different than killing their creature. So I think that Black White is not a bad archetype to be in. I'm never unhappy if that's where I end up, like intrinsically. But it's also not an archetype that you necessarily should be looking to go into based on any kind of warrior synergy. Just if those colors seem open, you should draft them.
Yeah, I think I learned that pretty quick because I made the assumption, I did fall for that trap early that, well, warriors were good before, and I see the word warriors a lot, not just on the cards, but also on their rules text. And I just like the payoff just didn't end up being there. It's just really not. What's the one in a black guy? The one that makes it so that they can't double block.
Oh, Bloodchin Rager.
Yeah, Bloodchin Rager. Like, that guy's good. Like, there's a good payoff. But the vigilance.
Well, yeah, Bloodchin Rager is a great card. You always play him in an aggressive deck, but it's not really a card you build your deck around because it's a 2-drop that's going to just die off.
It just dies anyway. Next is one that I'm really curious to hear what you have to say about this deck. It's blue-white. Tell me what your take is on blue-white.
It's funny because blue-white is exactly the kind of deck you would expect me to like. It is. Rebound with Student of Ojtai to gain a bunch of life. It's got, it's the perfect Skywise teaching deck and all that. Mm-hmm. Honestly, blue-white hasn't been doing it for me either. It just doesn't feel like it does anything. It just doesn't do anything.
It does spin its wheels a lot.
Yeah, it's got these. I think part of the problem is it's got these prowess cards or cards that have, pseudo prowess that where they pay you for casting spells.
Right.
But all the rebound spells are aggressive. Ojtai Summons is like the one exception. But Center Soul or Artful Maneuver or Tygam Strike. Yeah, these are aggressive
Great
cards.
Teacher's Decree, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All of these. So trying to build a blue-white defensive deck with them just doesn't really work. The blue-white Flyers deck doesn't need Tygam Strike. Artful Maneuver is fine, but Combat Tricks and Flyers aren't really the combination you want. Right. You want Combat Tricks and Bounce, or Flyers and Bounce spells. And overall, I just haven't seen the incentive to try to build a blue-white control deck. And the blue-white aggro deck, that's a good way to salvage a draft, because, blue-white trash pile is a deck that I don't mind drafting. That's where you have just like all these like terrible ways to get your terrible creatures through. You have, the elusive spell fists and Tygum strikes and, Aven skirmishers. Like it's not where you want to be, but it's at least a way to salvage something. In general, blue-white is not something I naturally gravitate towards. Like every now and then you're going to open an Archetype, and of course you're just going to end up there because Archetype is, a Dragon Lord and therefore insane.
Right.
But it's just, blue-white isn't really like, all right, here's how you build this blue-white control deck. It's like, no, blue-white control decks happen every now and then because you get the right uncommon and rare cards. But at a common level, you have, again, a very mixed bag kind of deck where you have 2/4 that gains you life when you play a spell, and rebound spells that are giving you unblockability and +2/+0. And it's like,
right.
These cards just don't want to be in the same deck.
No. Yeah. So for me, like, this is a deck that I like. I like this deck in the format, but there's some glaring holes. I think the tools are here somewhat in a way to make it work. So, we talk about blue-white skies, right? That's sort of the nickname for the limited deck that basically the idea is you play flyers, ideally cheap ones, and then you kind of clog up the ground. You play 1/4s and 2/4s and maybe a bounce spell and maybe one of these, we talked about, Ojutai's Breath or something like that. And you just sort of keep your opponent, off balance on the ground. This is the deck that wants the opponent to play like 5/5 for 5. You're just like, yeah, no problem. Yeah. Bounce that thing, hit you for 4 or 5 in the air. And you want to kind of get the job done. And I've seen that deck come together in this format. The problem that I see though is that it doesn't come together often enough, because the tools aren't there. You have cards that you just don't want to play. You mentioned those, Luis, the ones that just don't fit into this strategy at all. It puts a lot of pressure on how many Student of Ojutai you get, because that's a really key to this, key card to this type of deck, because it blocks well and it does gain you life, which can buy you the time. You have the removal spells and even some of the tempo plays. The question is, where are the flyers? Where are the things that you're casting and getting in for damage? And the problem is there's just not enough good ones. And the ones that are decent, we talked about Ojutai Interceptor earlier. I like Misthoof Kirin a lot. I think it's really good. And Ojutai Summon's a card that you and I both like too. The problem is, like, if you look at the Interceptor and the Kirin, they both die to all the removal in the format. Just straight up die. And they're not cheap. Neither of them are cheap. You have to invest mana. One of the better blue-white sky decks that I've seen was in maybe M11, M10, I can't remember, but there was that Pegasus, the 2/1 flyer for 2. Right. And like, that's the kind of card that you can get out to a quick start and kind of protect it and keep a clock going. And, maybe you follow it up with a Wind Drake, that's a 2/2 flyer for 3 mana. Those are the type of cards that I want to play in these decks, not these Ojutai Interceptors and Misthoof Kirins. Even though I think those cards are both respectable Magic cards, they just don't seem to fit into this strategy too well, because you dump a ton of mana into them. And if one of them dies, you can find yourself behind. The other thing that I've noticed is that, like, there are still decks that can just run over this deck, even when you have a decent build of it. And that to me kind of signals that maybe the tools just aren't there. So I have this in the mid pack. I'm not afraid to draft blue-white, but I don't think it's one of the better archetypes either, which makes me a little sad. I like this. I like that type of deck.
Yeah, it is the kind of deck I like to draft, like I said, but I don't end up here unless I have a specific reason to be. Like if you open a very strong, like you opened like let's say a great blue card like Icefall Regent, and then you got past 2 passivisms. It's like, okay, I'll be blue-white, sure. But yeah, I don't look to go into it based on taking 3 or 4 commons in a row.
Right. Yeah, exactly. The tools just aren't there. Green-white is next. I found this deck pretty pedestrian, to be honest. Like, not bad. I don't think it's bad. This is, you've said it a couple of times and I want to echo it again. You can play any of the color pairs. I really believe you can win a draft with any of the color pairs without anything remarkable happening. There will be preferred color pairs, but you can win. And I think green-white is perfectly capable of winning a draft as well. But ultimately, I found it pretty pedestrian. The white cards aren't blowing me away. The green cards, I like the top end of the green cards. I love an epic confrontation. I like some of the big green fatties. I think the Stampeding Elk Herd is one that I'm a big fan of. But ultimately, You know, these are all kind of just cards. And, you know, Sandcrafter Mage is decent. Salt Road Quartermasters is a card that's really impressed me. But we're still talking about kind of vanilla dummies on the ground. The question I had coming into the format was because, of course, Green-White is one of those, you know, the Dromica clan or whatever, where bolster is the thing. And I wanted to know if there was going to be a bolster deck. If there was going to be a thing where I did draft a super synergistic deck where I was like, I'm taking all the cards that say bolster or +1/+1 counters and I'm going to go off. And it's funny because the tools are actually there to make that deck work. There are a lot of cards that care about +1/+1 counters and moving them around or rewarding you for having them. But I just haven't felt like the reward was there. It just doesn't flow the way I want. I view it as like spikes in value or spikes in being rewarded, but not just like, oh man, the more of these I get, the better this thing gets. And it just keeps going and going and going. It's kind of like, yeah, no, you got a little bonus there for what you did. Good for you. But it just doesn't really make a deck for me.
So I assume you said spikes named after the spike mechanic in Tempest, which was the first instance of ++1 counters that got moved around.
I won't tell you what I drafted today, but
or is that because
may or may not have been
Tempest Remastered,
yeah.
which is coming up soon? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. We're, by the way, time out. We're going to talk about it next week on the show. We got a bunch of people asking on Twitter if we were going to do a show about it, and we are. In fact, it'll be somewhat similar to this, where we're going to go through the color pairs, I think, and talk about it. And if all the scheduling works out, we're going to have Ian Duke come on the show, who was one of the developers for the set. So look forward to that. All right, back to the discussion.
Yeah, when people ask if we're talking about Tempest Remastered, I alternate between saying we're not going to say a word and saying we're doing a full set review. So
just you got to keep them guessing.
Yeah, you have to manage expectations. So yeah, Green-White is a color pair that, yeah, nominally the theme is ++1 counters.
Mm-hmm.
My experience is that this is one of the good mid-range color pairs where you can just draft a fine green-white deck because the plan of cheap green and white creatures and combat tricks is actually a pretty good one.
Yeah.
The cards line up well to do that. And it uses cards like Lightcaster a little bit better than, you know, the other color pairs in the format. But you definitely aren't drafting an affinity deck here. You're not trying to draft a linear ++1 counter deck.
Exactly.
Just none of the cards work like that. You just play your Sandcrafter Mage, your Salt Road Quartermasters, your, you know, Dromoka's Gift, your random bolster cards. And sometimes, you know, you have enough that you play Kona for Strider. This is where Kona for Strider is at its best. But it's not generally going to be a deck where you're like, oh yeah, I need the, you know, 1-mana 1/1 that when it dies moves all its +1/+1 counters. Right. I've seen that card get played in this deck.
I have too.
But it's generally not where you want to be.
No,
and you should try to, don't drastically prioritize, like, you know, the 4 and a green 2/2 that bolsters 2, the Sandstep, Outcast or whatever. Or Scavenger rather. Just because the deck isn't that heavy on synergy. It just has cards that work well together that are okay by themselves. And again, that easily fits into like the, you know, the middle group of decks for me.
Right. And, you know, I think a good example is, there's the, Lightwalker, right?
Yeah.
And I think if you've played this format a lot, you've either done it yourself or seen somebody play Lightwalker and then Sandcrafter Mage. And that looks really great. I mean, that's a super synergistic start to the draft, a really nice little curve. But in a really good synergistic deck, you're going to see little 1-2 punches like that pop up often. And there isn't another one. Like, yeah. That's the payoff, right? It's not that there isn't just this huge, like, and then I played this into this and that made something ridiculous. It's kind of like, oh, okay, well, you took your mediocre card and your good card and you put them together and came up with a cool synergy. That's great. That's, you know, the first step towards making a synergistic deck. Then what did you do? And the problem is there's just not a whole lot. And so ultimately, I think the deck falls a little bit short for those reasons. That said, you know, you can draft a perfectly good, you know, kind of high average card quality type deck and get a win with green-white. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, which is kind of in contrast to the last deck I want to talk about, which is red-white.
Yes.
Because red-white, it looks like, you know, it looked like the chosen one when the set first came out because it had Warflare, it had Great Teacher's Decree, it had a Dragon Fighter, it had a bunch of ways to make tokens and a bunch of overruns. I've never won a match with red-white.
Oh, you haven't?
It just seemed so bad to me. Like it never works out. I don't know. I don't think that the archetype is terrible or anything like that, but My experience with red white has generally not been positive.
Yeah, I've found it in the middling, like, you know how we've been talking about these archetypes that we found fine, right? Like the green white falls into this category too, where I'm just like, shrug, it's fine, like you can play it. Red white too. I really thought it was going to be better than it was as well. These colors both seem deep. They seem to have the tools. Aggressive deck looked like it could be a thing in this format, you know, with just the two colors and, you know, not all this mana fixing. And it looked like we had sort of notched up the speed on the format a bit, which ended up being true. But agree, like comparing this to black red, it's just not close for me. Like I would take black red every single time, even though, you know, on paper, they don't look that far off. So this is, I think, just one of those synergy things where, you know, the pieces just don't quite interlock well enough with this deck to really put it over the top. It just doesn't seem to have that punch. It just doesn't seem to have that big finish. Again, on paper, it looks good, but it just doesn't seem to really perform.
It also just gets raked over the coals by Forked Bolt, just because a lot of a lot of the time, it's not that when they Forked Bolt your Sandstep Outcast or your Dragon Fighter, you lost card advantage. You didn't. It was just a 1-for-1. But when they kill two of your creatures with one of their cards, it just makes your War Flare and your Great Teacher's Decree so much worse that you are losing card value.
You know, it's really funny. I killed a Sandstep Outcast and its flying friend with a Twin Bolt, and I just felt like I was on top of the world. It's just like, I think it was the first time ever 1-for-1 with that stupid card. I just thought, oh, I broke the format wide open. And you know, kind of like in the back of my head, I'm like, yeah, you actually just 1-for-1 with their 3-drop. But, you know, but it's just like that card was just so difficult to do that with. Big picture stuff here, Luis.
Well, I have a rough ranking of the 10, and again, I have to reiterate, this isn't like you can't draft the bottom ones and you have to draft the top ones. It was just more like, all things being equal, if you got to choose, let's say going into a draft, you got to draft this one, you get to get the ideal cards for this one, you would choose the ones at the top. So I think the first cluster is red, black, blue, black, and red, green in roughly that order, but those are the ones that I'm actively happy to be into, and I'll slightly prioritize my picks a little bit to be into those color combinations.
I agree 100%. Those are the three that I've had the most success with as well.
It is risky to draft blue-black a little bit, because if you're taking blue cards, at least when I'm drafting, you're so much more likely to end up taking black cards that you kind of have to view those cards as similar, because if you skip ahead towards the bottom, the other three blue archetypes are the bottom three, I think, for me.
Yeah. So where do you go? That's interesting, right? So you do open up that Icefall Regent, right? Yeah. Now you got to be aware, because if your next pick is some, you know, red card that you think is, you know, oh, Draconic Roar, I'll take that. Well, where are you setting yourself? What kind of path are you setting yourself down? Now, you know, keeping in mind what we've been sort of saying over and over again, that you could win with any two-color pair, that's fine. But, you know, if there's a decent black card in there, you could set yourself into one of the better archetypes versus one of the ones that's a little bit, you know, on the bottom end. It's interesting to consider that.
Exactly. So the middle group has, you know, 5 archetypes in it. White, black, green, white, black, green, red, white, and blue, white. So all the white archetypes plus black, green.
Yes.
And these are the ones that, I think are perfectly serviceable, pretty mid-rangey. Like I'm not, if you told me, yeah, you did a draft and you ended up black and I'd be like, all right, my deck was probably okay. That's kind of how I feel about these. I don't hate drafting them, but I don't love it, and I won't go out of my way to draft them, nor will I go out of my way to avoid them.
Right. And again, I think that, you know, a fair way to look at these decks is to take let's say you just gave every card in your deck a rating from 1 to 10 based on just, you know, outright power level for the mana cost or whatever. You know, I think that how good your deck is going to be largely dependent simply on how high that number is, right?
Exactly.
Right.
These decks don't tend to have the kind of synergy that makes a deck full of 6s really operate as like an 8.5.
Right. And if you look up at the upper limit there, like the blue-black deck, for example, if you get a good version of that, your overall number is not going to be as high. You know, you're playing Palace Familiar, right? It's hard to give Palace Familiar a high, you know, you're not giving that an 8 out of 10. It's a 4 or 5 out of 10 or a 3 out of 10, because it's just the impact it has isn't that high. But when you start doing the synergistic plays, all of a sudden it looks a lot better. So your total power, you know, if you added up all the cards out of a good blue-black deck, might be significantly lower, but your deck's a lot better. So that's kind of, you know, where I'm saying, like, you get your black-green deck or whatever, you're going to want to look at just drafting the best possible cards. You will find, I've found small 2-card synergies, right? Like, little things that match up well, with each other, but that doesn't make a cohesive whole. That's just sort of kind of patching together the good stuff.
Exactly. And then kind of on the tail end, and this is right below blue-white, you have blue-green and blue-red. And these are the two archetypes that I've found that really don't go together. They have enough dysynergy that I actually try to avoid these to some degree. I just don't think you want to end up there.
Yeah, I'm the same. It makes me sad. I need a strong reason. I guess that's the thing. And these can jump up into that middle tier, even higher up. I mentioned the blue-green deck, the one I drafted that had Sarkon in it. It also had like 2 or 3 Aven Surveyors, right? Like, and when you start chaining together, like just raw power like that, sure, you're going to put yourself in a good position. And even though you don't have access to all the tools that another one might. Now, blue-red, I just can't get behind that one much at all. I haven't
missing Whirlwind Adept.
Yeah. And like you said, the, what's it called? The Teamer Battle Rage, of course, too.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good. I think that was a good discussion, Luis. I'm glad we took the time to kind of break this down. Like I said, I don't hate the format by any stretch. I'm still drafting it and
Marshall hates the format.
It hasn't been one of those things where I'm just like, nah, we're done. Give me Origins or Tempest Remastered or Modern Masters or whatever. But, I'm not in love with it. I'm definitely, I think when we come around to do a sunset show on it, this isn't going to be one of those formats that I'm like, can't wait to come back and draft it. I'll probably be like, that was fine. Next. At least that's how I feel currently. Maybe I'll go on a win streak and it'll all change and become one of my top 5. You never know. All right. Well, that's going to do it for this week. I want to mention once again, of course, that the show is brought to you each and every week by ChannelFireball.com. Make sure you check out the site for great prices and a full selection of sealed product and singles to fill out your standard deck, to get some sealed product to draft with your friends. You can find it all at ChannelFireball.com. If you want information about the largest magic tournament in the history of the game, GrandPrixVegas.com is where you can go to get that. Also, I should mention more often on LR. If you play Constructed, if you're into 60 card decks, if you're planning on, building a standard deck and you want to get better at that, we've got another podcast, Constructed Resources. Eric Froelich and myself, we do that show every week. And you can find that at crcast.com and also on channelfireball.com along with LR. Again, I mentioned it a minute ago, but Tempest Remastered. That's the new Magic Online set that sort of rebuilds the Tempest block and makes it, a bit more draftable. I actually had a chance to draft it today. I'm going to be writing a column about it for next week, and we're going to combine that with an interview and a discussion about the new set with Ian Duke, who, again, he was one of the developers. And I'm going to try to get things synced up for next week. Hopefully early in the week. I'm traveling to Toronto for the GP kind of in the middle of the week, but we'll see what we can do to get that up and something for you guys to look forward to as well. Anything else before we take off, Luis?
Not a whole lot, no.
Okay, well, we're going to call it good. If you want to find us on Twitter, I'm Marshall_LR, and Luis is at LSV. You can also find a bunch of cool stuff on lrcast.com. That's kind of the hub for all the LR stuff, including something I should mention more on the show as well. The LR subreddit. You should definitely check out the subreddit. If it's kind of like a forum, right? If you're old school and you don't really use Reddit, it functions a lot like a forum, and you can go there and chat about limited topics with like-minded people that listen to the show. If you have questions, you can post your drafts. You can ask about picks. You can ask about plays. You can bring up, maybe you put up your own list of the archetypes in the order that you think. And, if you think we're off or some of them should be switched or whatever, it's a great place to go to discuss stuff. And again, it's a friendly environment where you're going to meet people that think like you do, that are trying to improve. So I highly recommend checking that out. Until next week, guys, thanks for hanging out, and we'll talk to you then.
So for my sign off this week, actually was spurred by a kind of a conversation that I had on stream last week. I streamed the Magic Online Championships, as I mentioned, ended up as a sprinting war brute, 5'4". Just not the power toughness you want at the end of a tournament. And I guess that the one word that we were talking about was frustration. So frustration is a kind of interesting feeling because it's obviously negative in the sense, or at least that's the first impression everyone gets, because when you say I'm frustrated, that means you're not happy. And I actually think frustration can be a very powerful motivating force. And, this comes up actually a lot at work doing game design when you're looking at what kind of emotions that the person who's playing your game is feeling and what kind of that you want them to feel. For example, like if you want to look at some of the most popular games just in the world, League of Legends is one of them. Magic the Gathering is another good one. These games have a lot of frustration in them. I mean, have you ever gotten mana screwed? Have you ever gotten a bad teammate? Have you ever started 0-4 in League of Legends? Like these are things that are definitely frustrating, but these games are incredibly successful. And I think that the key there is a motivational frustration. And that's when you lose in Magic, you've got a couple different paths you can take, and you can be really frustrated, but you can channel that frustration into thinking like, well, that really sucked. How can I avoid that? How can I get better? And, it is tough. I got to admit, as you may have noticed, if you listen to me at all, I have not been winning very much on the Pro Tour. And that really sucks because I hate losing, and I love the Pro Tour, and losing at the Pro Tour is the worst. And, like I went 0-5 in the last Pro Tour. I haven't done well at a Pro Tour for a couple of years now, which is a long time, or at least feels like a long time. And sometimes I succumb to, frustration feeling hopeless, and then just that makes me less motivated to try to get better for the next one. And that's really bad. That's part of the reason that, you don't do well is when you feel like that. So trying to figure out how to make that frustration into the positive kind, into the kind that makes you want to excel and do better. I mean, that's the trick. It's really tough. I'm not going to say it isn't, but I do find myself very motivated after losing sometimes. And I actually feel very motivated right now after, my worst performance in history. It's like, this sucks. I don't want to lose anymore. How can I get better? How can I avoid losing? So my intention is to test a lot for the next Pro Tour to do a much better job. I did not do a great job coming up to this Pro Tour. For example, my teammates played the best deck in the tournament, which is now the best deck in Standard, and I didn't. Mm-hmm. And all the signs were there. I had access to the deck. I could have played it, and I just didn't. So trying to figure out how to avoid stuff like that is really important because, I want to do well. And honestly, if I put the effort in, even if I do poorly next time, I won't feel as bad. And I think that's the other key part is that you can put all the effort in and prepare as best you can and still do poorly in something. But if you prepared well, you feel a lot less frustrated because you did the thing you needed to do. So I don't know. It's tough. People ask, how do you deal with losing? I'm becoming an expert on this now, and I'm a good person to ask apparently. But it's keeping a good attitude and, trying to figure out what you can do to improve, not trying to kind of sinking into like, man, I'm really unlucky. Everything goes against me. Cause it feels like that sometimes. And sometimes maybe it's even true. I mean, it's sometimes you go 3 with a deck that really is going to go 2-1 or 3-0 most of the time. Doesn't mean you don't have to be happy about it, but you do have to realize that it just is going to happen. So I don't know. I thought it was an interesting conversation on stream, because people were talking about it, and it is something that comes up when you're looking at like, why do we play games? And part of the reason that these games are worth playing is that if you feel frustrated when you lose because you can do better, and because it feels so good to be rewarded when you do make the right decisions. So trying to channel that into a positive outcome is very important, and is not the easiest thing to do. It is one of the hardest things to master, especially if you kind of hit a streak where you're not doing well. You do have to kind of push through that, and hopefully I'll manage to do that. I'm feeling pretty confident at this point, and we'll see in a couple months how that ends up.
I know you'll get out of it.